The two dark shapes moved far slower than Dexter and Argmon, but that didn't make the situation any less tense. Sure, they were swimming fast, but what was in the water with them? And what were they thinking in the first place? You don't just walk up to a strange pool on a strange planet and jump in. Sure, they all needed a vacation. Vic had been working them hard, but they were prisoners. They weren't here to take a swim. "Come on, hurry up!" June could find her voice enough to yell. Joey thought he was going to pass out. He needed to keep breathing. Just keep breathing. They were going to be all right. The dark shadows continued to grow larger and more round as they came to the surface, and they were perhaps 15 or 20 feet in diameter. The closer they got, the less threatening they looked. "Joey, quit staring! I can't pull Argmon up on my own." He reached over and grabbed Argmon's two left arms, while June took the two right arms. The Shathar was heavy beyond belief. Joey had never even thought about trying to pick him up, and now he knew why. Not only was he wet and slippery, but he also smelled like a wet dog. Joey tried to keep his thoughts on pulling and not on how bad Argmon was going to reek until they can get a real shower. Both June and Joey almost fell over when Argmon came up out of the water. "Eep, eep, eep." "Yes, Dexter, thank you." June pulled herself out from under Argmon. Luckily, Joey didn't get nearly as wet as June had. He wanted to laugh, but knew that would earn him a punch in the arm. "What about Dexter?" Joey asked. He stood up and looked down into the pool. The water was only a couple of feet below the edge of the pool, but the sides on it were smooth and nearly impossible for Dexter to climb up. The triped swam under the water and made a large circle, then came back fast. Joey had an idea what Dexter was doing, but it was dangerous. Those two massive shapes were getting so much closer. The shapes were more egg-shaped and appeared to be whitish. They didn't move or jerk like they were swimming, but rather floating to the surface, like a couple of large balloons. Not knowing what they were made him a little scared, but they looked harmless enough. Dexter shot out of the water. June and Argmon had stood up, and Argmon caught Dexter out of the air and set him down. Even though he knew what was happening beside him, he couldn't tear his eyes away from the slowly rising shapes. The twin shapes looked too familiar in the yellowish liquid in the pool. For a moment, Joey thought it might be two blob things rising, but these weren't as big as the blobs they'd met. It wasn't until a low rumble rippled the surface of the water that he got seriously worried, but he couldn't pull himself away from the edge. Then he saw what was rising. "They're eyes!" "Joey, those can't be eyes." He lost his voice. He couldn't say anything. The eyes were about 10 or 15 feet from the surface, and sure enough, he could make out the iris and pupil of gigantic eyes. Even though he found it hard to breathe, he couldn't help but imagine the world's largest googly eyes in the pool. That's what it looked like. It didn't look scary, but he couldn't see what the eyes might be attached to. The eyes made it to the surface and kept going. The liquid of the pool kept rising up and up until it towered over them. Again, some deep, resonant sound vibrated through the floor and his body and made him feel ill. He should have been frightened, but couldn't bring himself to be scared. The thing coming out of the pool looked like one of the giant blobs that had captured them, except this one just kept getting bigger and bigger. It was like trying to be afraid of a building you were standing next to. His brain couldn't process it enough to make sense of it. Except for Dexter, they all fell to the floor because of the low vibration. All of his strength had left him as the sound continued. Finally, it stopped, and he thought he might be able to catch his breath. The sound came again, but not as loud or as low. It still wasn't anything he could hear, but just feel. The eyes kept looking at them. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. This pool of yellow water had eyes. What would a big pool of water need eyes for? Tiny eyes appeared on the side of the mass in front of them. It looked like an arm growing out of the side of the mass, but it had eyes too. The gigantic mass started to shrink down and lower back into the pool. The thing Joey first thought of as an arm broke off and settled on the side of the pool. He had to keep looking at it and wonder just what it was, but at the same time, he had trouble not watching those massive eyes sink back into the pool. "Is this better?" Joey didn't see who had said that. "June, was that you?" That wasn't me, and it sure wasn't Dexter or Argmon. The small blob, now only slightly taller than Argmon, moved in front of the four. A patch just under its eyes vibrated. "Hello. What are you doing on my planet?" "Our ship was towed here. We didn't mean to intrude. We just need a place to stop for a little while." June slightly bowed. The eyes on the blob looked from June to Joey. "There are 4 of you, and each of you different. Where did you come from?" "No, don't answer that." Joey felt something in his mind, causing him to close his eyes, and then he thought someone slapped him. He opened his eyes to see the blob just looking at them all. "This is fascinating. You are from outside." This message had been translated to me, but I do not think it possible. It seems that one of our exhausted ports had been partially blocked. That must be the ship you were talking about. Do you know who is in the second ship?" "A second ship? Joey, you don't think—" June grabbed his shoulder. "No, it can't be. Their ship is a lot bigger than ours. There's no way it could have fit in there." "You're right, but who then?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Blob Thing. We don't know who that is." "I apologize. First, I try to communicate with you using sound frequencies you are not physically able to process. Then I invade your thoughts. I know your names, and you are welcome. My name is Blue Plupanu. You are inside my planet." Again, June bowed. "Thank you for your hospitality. We are quite tired from walking into your palace. Do you have anywhere we could sit down and converse with you?" "Of course. You have muscular structures that require rest. My physical form is far different from yours. I require no such rest. I must apologize, but I have no such place for you to sit. You are welcome to sit on the floor. I am inquiring if there is any sustenance or liquid on this planet that you might be able to process." The blob closed its eyes as the 4 of them sat on the floor. Argmon growled and shook his fur violently before sitting. "Eep, eep, eep." "I don't know, Dexter. Just sit tight." June put one hand on Dexter's head. "I assure you, I mean none of you any harm. It seems that my planet was pulled out of its orbit. Technicians are working to figure out what happened. At present, we are too far from our home star to do any good." This thing had been in their minds, but it didn't process that they were responsible for towing its planet away from their home star. Joey wasn't even sure if Vic had kept track of where they had gotten the planet from. Could Muffin have that information in her memory banks? Would she remember it if Vic hadn't told her? What if this thing wanted to punish them for pulling their planet away? Suddenly Joey felt sick. What if one of the other planets they'd been towing had something like this inside? Would the people that paid them for it have smelted the planet down regardless of a society living inside? He shook his head. No, they wouldn't do that. No one could do anything like that. "June, I think we need to go. Do you think we can just leave?" "I'm afraid I cannot allow you to go until I've processed all the information involving this incident. At first, there was only a dip in the power from what you might call a star in the sky. This star is powered by the star our planet orbited. Without our home star, we will have trouble keeping it supplied with enough power to keep our world going. As you surely saw when you came inside, we have populated nearly the entire inside of this planet." "How did you come to live here?" Joey had so many questions, and now that this thing seemed to want to talk, he figured maybe they'd find out what they'd done and help right their wrong. "I was the first. In your words, I would have been the size of an ocean, spread out across the planet. I lived on the outside of the planet during that time, but the star my planet orbited was not stable. I had a lot of time, so I spawned replicants of myself. These, being almost mindless beings, started to dig. I made more replicants, and they continued to dig. When a replicant could last no longer, it would be reabsorbed, and I would create it anew. To help them survive, I had to find sustenance for them. I created replicants to find sustenance, liquid, build shelter, transportation. My size diminished slowly as I created more and more replicants, but with each generation, they grew more and more intelligent, and I grew more pleased with their progress to protect us all from the threat of the planet's star. Eventually, there was enough spread across the world to be able to reshape it. I knew that with the star's instability, we needed to protect ourselves. So, the inside of the planet was pulled out and spread out far enough to build a shell to protect us from the star's radiation. Once that shell had been completed, I was able to allow the replicants to do as they would. As I am their creator, they provide for me. I still absorb those no longer able to continue, and spawn new beings to replace those we have lost. Wait a minute. Are you some kind of god or something? Joey was having a hard time grasping what it had said. It just wasn't possible for one being to have created copies of itself to populate a planet. Things like that just didn't happen. And was this thing in the pool all just one massive being? I am the first. My size has been diminished greatly, but it gives me pleasure to see that all I have spawned continues without as much help as it once needed. It is only when something happens that is outside the realm of their understanding, they come to me. A long time I have been here, just existing, and waiting. I am pleased by all my replicants have created. So everything we've seen, that's all you're doing? Joey kept looking from the small being, no bigger than Argmon, to the pool, and tried to figure out just how large the being must be in order to fill it. Oh no. You misunderstand me. Each replicant does as it will. I only ever provided simple directions. They may not all appear the same, but... Go! That way! Let's move! Vic appeared out of nowhere with a Marine, both of them carrying guns. Where did Vic come across a Marine? What was he doing here? Where were they going? The Marine, wide-eyed and trying to look everywhere at once, grabbed Joey, while Vic grabbed June. Vic pointed to the area past the pool, and they all began to run. No one had a chance to ask any questions. Dexter and Argmon followed at the back of the group. Vic, wait a minute! June didn't get to finish what she wanted to say, as Vic pulled her along. Plu-Plu-Panu just stood and watched as they ran from the end of one platform toward the other. Joey tried to fight, but Vic and this Marine, his uniform said, "Who?" and his face confirmed he was some sort of Asian descent, pulled them along, and didn't allow anyone to ask any questions or even protest. You've been listening to Hollow, V&A Shipping, Book 2, written and read by J.R. Murdoch. For more information about this production and its author, visit jrmurdoch.com. There are a lot of ways you can choose to spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me.